We reached the end of the road here with the Tamiya versus Monogram Miami Vice Ferrari Testarossa build. Now let's take a look at both cars completed and see which is better. Okay, here we have both cars. This is the Tamiya and this is the Monogram. Both are attractive and represent the real car very well. One major difference is that the Tamiya is the European version, the Monogram is the American version, so there are some differences which are just attributable to each individual version of the car. So let's take a close-up look. First thing we're going to do is look at the front ends. Now the front ends of both cars, very well done. But there's some high spots and low spots on each one. Now, as far as the Monogram goes, you can see that its ride height is a bit higher than the Tamiya, which is attributable probably to the fact that it's got taller tires, which is probably a little more period correct than the Tamiya with its very low profile tires. But the ride height looks more correct on the Tamiya when compared to the real car. Now we look at the front grills and the signal lights. The American version with the full width amber lights, and the grills on the front of the Monogram are sealed. It is not open into the car. Now, when I made this car, I wanted it to be aesthetically as close to the Miami Vice car as possible. So I did give it the full width amber marker lights on the front. But as you look, well, I'll have to touch that up a little bit, I guess. A little chip there. The grille on the front of the Tamiya is actually open into the car. So it is actually an open grille. That's a plus. The Tamiya actually has headlights that are actually posable, so you can put them up or down. They're very fragile, so it's not something I will be doing very often, if at all. Now, one place where the Tamiya is sort of disappointing is in these wipers. They have these very thin, spindly wipers. Not much detail in them at all. They're not bad, but they could have done better. Now, Monogram apparently seems to have gone all out on the wipers, as the arms are shaped, the blades are curved to wrap around the windshield. You can even see the hoses for the washers going up the wiper arm. And you can see the slats in the blade for the aerodynamic purposes. They're just really nicely made wiper arms. So I have to give it to Monogram on that one. Now we can look at the Ferrari badge itself. The Monogram badge seems to be just a little too large. The Tamiya badge seems to be just right in scale with the vehicle. The Tamiya also had an indent in the hood to place the badge into, which centers it perfectly and gives it more of a separate installed part look as on the real car. Now let's look at the single mirror, which is one of the defining attributes of this car. You can see the Tamiya seems to have a more proper shape. The Monogram seems to be a little too far extended out, and the spokes are not as well defined as on the Tamiya. While they both work, I think the Tamiya's is a little better. And as you can see on the interior, I've added a few custom touches such as carpeting, seat belts, buckles, and a few other things we'll see. On the monogram, I did pretty much the same thing. Seat belts, buckles, carpeting, painted everything up. Now, one thing I did note is that on the Tamiya, the top of the door panels and the armrests look much more realistic than in the monogram. As in the monogram, I think they're too thin. It's just one molded in panel, and they don't come out far enough that if you were actually driving this car, you could actually rest your arm on it. While the Tamiya looks like it's shaped perfectly for use. So I have to give it to them on that one. The monogram cockpit seems to be wider because the upper door panel and the armrests are so thin. And you can see that the Tamiya seems to be a little tighter, and that's for the same reason. The upper part of the door panel and the armrests are thick, and they reach the seats. And you can see that there, where they don't in the monogram. So it's a much more realistic look from the Tamiya. Alright, now let's look at them in their side profiles. The biggest thing you'll note in the side profile, and the biggest defining characteristic between the American and the European version, is the fact that the American version has side marker lights. The European version should have one side marker light behind the front tire, which I chose not to paint, again, just for aesthetic reasons. Now, that can be attributed to the individual models. Now, as far as detailing goes, one of the biggest disappointments of the monogram, the wheels themselves are not, not unattractive. They could have been better, but they're not unattractive. But if you look behind the wheels, there's nothing there. Now, I painted the interior there in a matte silver to give the appearance of a brake rotor, but there's nothing in there. Now, if we look at the Tamiya, it is fantastic in that there is a brake caliper, a rotor, full braking system behind that wheel, same as in the rear. Full braking system. The wheels are also cast quite a bit nicer, and they're not in the bright shiny chrome that the monogram comes in, which in retrospect I probably should have dechromed them and painted them myself, but I really don't mind it that much. Now let's look at the shapes. You can see the monogram and the Tamiya appear to be slightly different in their shape. Looks almost as if the monograms just a little off, while the Tamiya has basically a dead-on copy of the Testarossa's silhouette. While the monogram looks good, it just seems that the proportions are slightly off. The rocker panel is too tall, making the door a little too short. The fender arch is a little too pronounced. Whereas on the Tamiya, you can see how short the rocker panel is, giving you more length to the door, more height to the door. As you can see where from the edge of the strake to the top of the door here is much taller than it is on the monogram. The strakes actually come up quite a bit higher because the rocker panel is quite a bit higher. That is not as accurate as the Tamiya depiction. Also on the monogram, the chassis appears to be a bit shorter than the body, so there is a little bit of a gap in front of the rear tire. Okay, now let's look at the rear ends. You'll notice the first thing is that the black bumper pads for the American version on the monogram replicated nicely along with the lower grille, and this sleek and simple bumper of the European version on the Tamiya, which I personally prefer. And you'll also notice a third brake light on the monogram. No third brake light on the Tamiya. Those are the biggest differences in the rear. Now let's look at the engines. Okay, here we have both engines with air cleaners removed. So you can get a look at some of the detailing. You see I've added harnesses. The monogram actually is better detailed than the Tamiya on the intake, as it includes all the pressure sensors. Whereas on the Tamiya, the intakes have none of that. It is much more simplified. Now the Tamiya has a much better ease of assembly than the monogram did. Goes together perfectly. But I gotta give, as far as for initial appearance, the monogram engine takes it. Okay, here we have the cars from above, and as you can see, the Tamiya actually have a shape that's more reminiscent of the Testarossa. As wider, it's much wider in the rear than it is in the front. The monogram not quite as wide, so the proportions are slightly off. Here we can see the interior of the monogram, which aside from the door panels is not bad. It has the molded in luggage straps, and it has the center stack with engraved details. I've also included phones in both cars from a Pontiac Fiero model kit. The Tamiya was missing the luggage strap, so I had to fabricate my own, and also missing all the detailing in the center console stack, so I had to fabricate my own. Other than that, it was a notch above the monogram. Here's a look inside the Tamiya from the passenger side. You can see the details that I added in the center stack, where that was nothing but an open space. You can also see the phone right on the side. Now the monogram, you can see the phone on the side and the instruments that were engraved, which the Tamiya was lacking. The Tamiya also has one feature the monogram does not, which is posable steering, which is pretty neat. So now for the question everybody's been waiting to hear answered: which car is better? Well, it kind of depends on what you want out of it. If you want a more screen accurate build and are a huge fan of the show as I am, then you're going to want to go with the monogram, as it's the American version of the car. If you want a precise, well-engineered model, which is quite a dream to put together. I mean, it really was well-engineered. Everything fit right. Usual Tamiya quality. Then you're going to want to go with the Tamiya. Here's a quick look at the undercarriage. Here you can see on the monogram, very nicely detailed. The American exhaust, which is completely different than the Tamiya. But everything is represented well. A little bit of a pain to put together, but not everything fit the way it was supposed to, and some things had to be modified. Here we see the Tamiya, straight pipes, no mufflers, no catalytic converters. Everything fit like a dream on this. It just went together so well. Also builds on a separate subframe, as well as the front, completely separate subframe, which then gets bolted to the chassis. Really, really good job on that. Really enjoyed building that. So now it comes down again to which one do I think is better? While I am a huge Miami Vice fan, and even with all its faults, including wheels that wouldn't stay on, so they had to be glued on, I've got to say that I'm leaning toward the Tamiya as the better of the two. It is the more expensive of the two, and it shows in the fact that it is so well engineered that it just goes together exactly the way it should, and is a dream to put together. But it is at a higher price point, so the lower price of the monogram, combined with putting in the extra effort to make it look as close as possible to the TV car, which includes actually changing the mounting position of the wheels because they didn't fit right, and all the problems with putting the suspension together. It Bang for the buck, the monogram is the way to go. But if you want a high quality, really great representation of the Ferrari Testarossa, I've got to go with the Tamiya. That's my choice for top of the line Ferrari Testarossa in 1/24 scale. But do not count out the monogram. It is worth building and worth buying, and at its price point, it's worth every penny. But if I can only have one, it's got to be the Tamiya. If I can have them both, I would get them both because they're both well worth building. So both of them get a thumbs up from me. The Tamiya's thumb is just a little bit higher than the monogram. Alright. And that's my review. Love them both. They're both worth building. Get them both if you can. Otherwise, get the one that you can get and just enjoy building it. Alright. See you in the next video. Whatever that may be.